We're going to be in the book of Joshua this morning. In the story, it's going to be chapter 7, is what it is, the 7th installment. So what we've done so far in the last 6 weeks is we've gone through what's called the Pentateuch. That's the first 5 books of the Bible. That's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And most of those books have to do with the law. And that's what that means. Penta is 5, and the Tuk means scroll, so it's the 5 scrolls is what Pentateuch is. But we're starting the book of Joshua, and this is a new turning point for the Israelites. Courage. If you think about it, just that word, we all kind of want courage, but really it's something we kind of try to avoid in a sense. When it comes to doing something that takes courage, sometimes we try to backpedal and backstep. We kind of try to move a little bit away from that. We like to do things safely. We like to do things that don't have much risk involved. And there's a problem with that, and that is that as a Christian, we got to do a lot of things that take a lot of courage. We really do. We cannot play it safe when we follow God. And there's a big reason for that. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. So last week we talked about the wandering. The 12 spies went into the land of Canaan. And 2 of them came back, Joshua and Caleb, and said, the land is beautiful. It's full of it's fertile. God has given it into our hands. Let's go and take it. The other 10 men said, no, we can't. It's full of giants. The people there are so numerous and so large. We feel like grasshoppers compared to them. And so the entire nation of Israel listened to the 10 instead of Joshua and Caleb. They denied going into the land of Canaan. And so much so they're getting ready to stone Joshua and Caleb and going to choose a new leader instead of Moses. And God said, fine, listen, I'll give you what you want. You won't go into the land of Canaan. You just said, what have you brought us into the wilderness? We're going to die anyway. And God said, this is what's going to happen. Since you didn't obey me, you're going to wander in the land for 1 year for every day that you were spying out Canaan. So there are 12 spies. They were spying for 40 days. So they spent 40 years wandering in the land. And God said this. He said, every one of you that is over the age of 20 will die before you head into the land of Canaan. Only those people that are under 20 years old, because that would have been probably the age that they would have been able to help the nation make a decision. I mean, their voice would have been listened to. So he said, everybody under the age of 20 will go in. So what I'm going to do is, everybody over 20, you're going to die in the wilderness. And your children are going to take the nation into it, except for Joshua and Caleb, because they had faith in me. They trusted me. They listened to my voice. And so we look at it and we think, man, that is so unfair. All these people that made this decision. And here's Joshua and Caleb, these 2 men that are fervently faithful to God, and they're stuck wandering for 40 years, and it's not their fault. It wasn't their choice, but that's what happened. Moses and Aaron included were also died in this journey. Look, last week Moses was allowed to look into the land of Canaan, but God said there were some times when God told Moses to speak to a rock. And see, this is, as we look at this is how important obeying God is, and listening to his word. This is how important it is. God told Moses to speak to a rock because the people didn't have water. He said, go to speak to this rock and water will come out of it. Just go do that. Well, Moses got up. He got fed up with the people. He was short-tempered anyway. And he struck the rock twice with his staff. Water still came out, but God said, because of that, you did not allow me to have the glory for that. And that decision is preventing you from entering into the land of Canaan. And I think sometimes we don't recognize the importance of our obedience to God. I think sometimes we take it lightheartedly, and we don't understand that there are some definite consequences when it comes to listening to his voice and obeying him 100%. And so these stories, I firmly believe that these stories are in them. They're written down for us to look at and say, oh, this is important. This is really important. So that's what we have. Moses and Aaron, they die. Everybody over the age of 20 dies, except for Joshua and Caleb. We're 40 years later, and we get to the book of Joshua. And Christine read the first 7 verses this morning, but I want to start here in verse 5. Now, this is God talking to Joshua. So Moses has already died. Joshua has now been given the leadership of all of Israel. Moses has trained him to do that. And I don't know if you remember this, but way back in Exodus, there's a time where it talks about Moses going into the tent to speak with God, and it says a young man named Joshua went with him. And it says in there that Moses spoke to God as if he was a friend, and when he was done, he got up and left, but Joshua stayed there. And the idea is that Joshua just wanted to dwell in the presence of God. That's the kind of heart that Joshua had. And so God said, all right, this is the man now that's going to lead, because his heart is fully bent on me. His heart wants to serve and obey me. So Joshua is given the charge over Israel. This is a big deal. This is a nation, over 1 million people. And just look at what God says to Joshua. I want to start here again in verse 5. And Moses has died, and God is speaking to Joshua. He says this, no man, he's telling him he's going to go into the land and take it over. And he says, no man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. No one will be able to conquer you, he says. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Now, I want you to count how many times God refers to this right here, starting in verse 6. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous. There's one, okay? Keep counting. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened. That's 4. Do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Can you hear the themes that God's trying to relay to Joshua here? It's pretty prevalent. You know, if you can't hear them, here's what they are. There's 3 recurring themes that God is telling him. Be strong and courageous. Obey my word, and I will be with you. We hear that all the way through the scriptures, don't we? All the way through. This reoccurring theme. It's that we can trust God no matter what. We can trust him no matter what. That in itself should give us courage. Knowing that we can trust God to keep his word should give us courage. And the other thing is, be strong and courageous. That's that. So that's 4 times he's told him, be strong and courageous, and do not be frightened. Now, that's when God called Joshua to be the leader. Do you remember what happened when God called Moses? What happened 4 times? God says, lead my people. He says, who am I to do that? That's 1. Who am I? He's questioning God, who am I to do it? God says, lead my people. Next thing, he says, lead my people. He said, what if they don't listen to me? You know, what if they don't? Who am I to tell? And then who am I to tell them brought me? Who am I to tell them did this? And God says, I am who I am. And then finally Moses says, no, send somebody else. So we see this 4 times God reminds Moses, no, listen, I'm going to take care of things. And here we see 4 times God's telling Joshua, be strong and courageous. Listen to my word, obey it. And be strong and courageous, and I'm going to be with you. Now, the thing is we're not going to have one of these 3 without the other. That's one thing that we've got to understand when it comes to obeying and following God. We don't have one without the other. God says, be strong and courageous in doing what I ask you to do. Because when God leads us to do something, it takes courage. That strength and that courage comes from him. And we're to be obeying his word. So all of this, be strong and courageous, obey my word, and I will be with you. They go hand in hand. You can't take one without the other when it comes to following God. That's the way it is. That's the way everything works. Because if we're obeying his word, then we need to be doing what he asks us, which takes courage to do it. And we know that when we do that, he will be with us. But he's not going to go with us if we're not obeying him and doing the things that take courage to do. You got to have all three of them. We can't pick and choose one of the three. It's got to take all three things. That's what he's saying. So obey my word. That's the second one. Follow God and things will go well with us. The Bible tells us that. Don't follow him, and they don't. It's that simple. And sometimes we try to put all kinds of other things into the idea that maybe we don't have to obey him 100% here, or maybe this is different nowadays and we don't have to obey this. No, that's not it. When God says obey me, he means obey me, and that's it. Sometimes I think that we think God is going to change his mind all the time for us. Last night, a thing Jordan and I do because it's hard to find a babysitter on a Valentine's Day, and so what we do is we feed our kids, we put them to bed, and I went out and I found the steak dinner, and we cooked it at home. It's a whole lot less expensive that way and so I cooked the dinner, and Jordan's straightens up the kitchen. We set the table and we sit down and we had candles and everything. It's just beautiful. And there was the hallway light on. It's on in the man. So we're like, let's shut that off. Shut it off. Caveman comes down and he's crying. Why'd you shut the hallway light off? Their sisters were up. They were waking Airdrie up. She needed to be asleep. You need to have the light off so the kids. But I want it on. I was like, turn your night light on. But it annoys me. I was like, he said that my decision was we're going to shut the hallway light off. He went for an hour up and down trying to convince me. Finally, I said, I just had to tell him, no, I made a decision, and that's it. And it wasn't because I was getting after him. It wasn't because I was trying to get to him. And God's the same way. When he makes a decision and calls us to obey him, it's not because he says, I'm going to make you do this because I have something out for you. It's, I need you to do this because it's the best thing. God doesn't call us to do things just because he's got it out for us. God doesn't call us to stand up and be firm in our faith, do things that take courage. He doesn't do that just to get at us, just because he's got something against us. Maybe we think, I did messed up now. God's going to ask me to do this. God does not do that. God asks us to do things and asks us to obey him because it's the best thing for us. We need to understand it. Just like anybody that's raised kids, you tell them something, you give them a rule, you ask them to obey you. It's for their good. You don't ask them to do things just to get at them. God would never do that to us. And so when it calls for things, even things that just don't make sense, when God calls us to obey him, it's for our good and for the good of those around us. Deuteronomy 6, verse 6 says, listen to this. These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. Now this is about God's word, about his command, about obeying him. These are our instructions from God. These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. Do you get the picture here? Talk about obeying God and his word all the time. It never leaves your mouth. That's the way we're to do it. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand. They shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you with great and good cities that you did not build, and houses full of all the goods that you did not fill, and cisterns that you did not dig, all these things God's given us, it's not their work, it's God's work he's doing this. And when you eat, they're full. Take care lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of slavery. The Lord your God is in your midst. He's a jealous God, saying, don't disobey, because the anger of the Lord will be kindled. These things that I'm asking you to do are for your own good, God is saying. In Deuteronomy chapter 28. Now, these are all before they come into the land. So these are the things that Joshua is being reminded of to obey. Deuteronomy chapter 28. God says this, if you faithfully obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. Do you remember way back when God talked to Abraham and said, I will bless all the nations of the earth through you? That applies to us today. When we are obedient to God's commands, he does the same thing, and he raises us above the nations, and our example becomes a blessing to all of those around us. It goes on to say, all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the voice of the Lord. And then I want to go to verse 15. So that's what happens if we obey. This is what Joshua is thinking. Verse 15, but if you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and his statutes that I command you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. God's not giving the curses. He allows them to overtake us. That's what it is. He says, if you're not going to obey me, then my hand's not with you, and the world is going to sweep you away. And that's what happens when we don't obey the Lord. Jesus says this. He said, if you love me, you will obey what I command you. So how can we not be obeying the commands of God and say that we're a Christian, that we love God? Jesus said, if you love me, you will obey me. God says that. If you love me, take courage, obey me, and I will be with you. And that's the last one. I will be with you. See, from the beginning, this is God's desire. From the first moment he created Adam, his desire was to be with his creation. His desire today is to be with his people. And when we obey him, he stays with us. So what Jesus said in John 14. So this is stretching it from what God says in the Old Testament to what Jesus says in the New Testament. So sometimes we say, well, that's the Old Testament. Maybe it doesn't quite apply. We'll find it in the New Testament. This is what Jesus says. John 14, verse 23 and 24, he says, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him. Now this is a cause and effect thing, okay? If you love me, you keep his word, my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words. You see this? Even Jesus here is saying, you love me, you obey my commands, and I will be with you. I will be with you. So we're called to take courage, be strong. That's really the whole theme of Joshua, this first part, is to be courageous. To step out and do the things that maybe you're afraid of. And this is one thing we've got to understand when it comes to courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is not the absence of fear, but it's moving forward in spite of the fear. It's taking that step. There's a difference between being courageous and being foolish. You know, there's kids that jump off the pier, Dukin. I don't think that's courageous. I think it's foolish because you're not going to find me doing it. All right? Not me. I'd like to watch them because that's kind of fun, but I'm not going to. There's a lot of things that we think, oh, that's pretty courageous, and they're foolish. That's not. There's a difference in that. So there's a difference between courageous and being foolish. And so Joshua was surely worried which side of the line he was on as he led Israel. And he was executing God's battle plan. That's what he was doing. God gave him this battle plan, and he was executing it. And see, God gave him this. He was to go and march around the city This is the battle plan. Blowing trumpets. Keep that in mind. So I can't imagine the fear that Joshua would have as he's given this, and now all of a sudden it's in his hand, and he's to be out, and he's to be taking over the land of Canaan. He's the one that's now to be in charge of God's people, and they've got loads of people to take care of. They've got a huge battle in front of them. It seems impossible. I can't even imagine the fear that he might have. But this is what happened. Joshua continued on because he didn't focus on his smallness. Remember when the 10 men went and they said they're giants in the land. They're bigger than us. They're physically larger than us, is what they were saying. They're a race of big men there. If you're in the western United States, there are 3 states. There's South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas. I want to tell you something. The boys in high school there, they eat corn-fed beef. They're bigger than everybody else. They're just big. That's kind of the idea here. When I would play football, it was you'd play somebody from a Nebraska team, and you call them the corn-fed boys because they're larger. They're just bigger guys. Maybe so that's the idea here. I mean, that's kind of, and they were scary. They're scary. They're big, big guys. And so that's what happened here. These guys go in and they're like, listen, they're huge. Even if we were numbered equally, they're way more than us. But even if we were numbered equally, we couldn't do it because they're so much bigger than us. And see, that's what their focus was on, was us. They're bigger than us. Their focus was on our smallness. And that's what our problem is sometimes when God calls us to something. We focus on how small we are compared to the problem we're facing. And God says, no, look at how big I am compared to the problem you're facing. And that's what Joshua did. Joshua goes in and he's focused on God's bigness, not on the littleness of him or the nation. So sometimes our fear is just that. It's a fear of, I'm not able to do it. There's something else that I want to come to you in this story, and that's sometimes it's the fear of our own past. Sometimes our own past prevents us from serving God with our future. You ever thought of that? Sometimes our past prevents us from serving God with our future. And it's this idea, I've done this in my past, I wouldn't be able to do that. They would know me as being that person, maybe. And I want to tell you something. Joshua sends 2 guys into Jericho. There's a spy out the land. Well, these 2 guys, these spies, they go to this place in Jericho that's kind of the brothel. It's a woman named Rahab lives there. And so Rahab takes them in, and she actually hides them. But when she's hiding, because the men of the city now are looking for them, they found out the king of Jericho knows these guys are there, so he's sending search parties trying to find these 2 spies. Rahab hides them up on the roof because she's drying flax up there. It's the time of harvest is when it is. So she's drying flax up on a roof, and she hides them up there. But it says before they lay down, she says this. It's in Joshua chapter 2. And she says this, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who are beyond the Jordan to Sihon. And she starts talking about all these things that they've done, and all these things that God has done through them. And now she says in verse 12, now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the 2 spies says, listen, as surely as this is, we'll give life for yours. You have done this. As long as you don't say anything, you will be saved. But when we come, you stay in your house. They gave her this sign. They said, tie this red cord out your window. And so the soldiers come and they ask her, have you seen these? She said, yeah, I've seen them, but they're probably gone a long time from now. If you hurry, you might be able to catch them. So she lies to save them. But then she lets them down outside of the city on ropes, and they get back and they give the report, tell Joshua all they can do. And so they come back and they take the city. And so here is Rahab. She's a prostitute, is what she is. And God uses her to save the nation of Israel. God uses her to save these two men, to bring back the report, to let everybody know what's going on. Here's a prostitute. I'm going to read something for you. The book of Matthew. So if you think your past is going to prevent you from being used, look at this. Matthew chapter 1, verse 4. And Ram is Judah. This is the genealogy of Jesus, by the way. This is Jesus' ancestors. Ram, the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab, the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon, the father of Salmon, and Salmon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab. This prostitute is the great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus Christ. So if you think God cannot use you because of your past, think again. The whole point is she recognized who God was. She decided she's going to live for God now, and she starts serving Him, and God uses her to bring about His bigger plan. Don't short sell yourself because of your past. The other thing I think we need to take from this is that no matter what the odds are, God wins the battle. When we are serving Him, when we are loving Him and serving Him with our lives, God will win the battle. Chapter 6 of Joshua is where we're going to be now. And most of us know the story. So God gives Joshua these, tells him what you're to do. He says this, listen, this is how you're going to defeat Jericho. You're going to march around the city once a day for 6 days, and the weapons you're going to take is you're going to have some priests in front blowing trumpets. And then on the seventh day, you're going to march around 7 times, and then you're going to yell real loud. Now, would you join an army where the general says, hey, this is our plan? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? That is absolutely ridiculous. Here's the plan. We're going to march around the city, and then we're going to yell real loud. Well, guess what? God's ways are sometimes very ridiculous to us. And if you haven't figured out that from the past 5 weeks that we've looked at His story, then you need to open your ears up, because God uses some ridiculous things that we look at them and they just seem absolutely ridiculous. We got to put ourselves in those places, because we look back and we say, of course God used just trumpets and that, but put yourself in their place and say, how comfortable would I feel if I was told to march around 7 times and yell, and God's going to destroy the city? Not the kind of guy you'd want to follow into battle, is it? This is the thing we've got to understand. God's going to call us. He will call you to do something that seems ridiculous in your life. He's going to call you to do something, just you look at it and you go, are you kidding me? That does not make sense. But here's the point. God doesn't call us to do things because they make sense. God calls us to do things because they bring Him glory. That's our purpose, is to bring Him glory. So when God's calling you to do something that just seems absolutely ridiculous, it's because He wants the glory. And it's your faith in Him, following His direction, that gives Him that. I want to ask you this. Are you living right now in fear of man's circumstances, or in fear of your own circumstances, instead of being obedient to God? It's a question we need to ask all the time. Am I living right now in fear of man or in fear of consequences that I see might be happening? Am I living under the shadow of those instead of rising above it and being just obedient to God? It's a question we need to ask all the time. It is always better to trust God with everything. When things don't seem to make sense, when things just seem ridiculous, we're called to trust Him. We're going to end the sermon here with Joshua. He says this in chapter 24. You know this. He says, "Choose you this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we are going to serve the Lord." Choose this day who you will serve. But for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. My grandfather had that. He was so proud of that. He got it in a plaque or a picture, something like that. And he hung it right as people would walk in through the back door. Because in the country, you go through the back door. You never go to the front door. Sometimes you go to the back door. You go to the back door and you walk in, and there it is. It's hanging on the wall right above the cook stove, the wood stove. And it's the first thing you see. As for me, my house, we will serve the Lord. And he lived that way. And he raised his kids to live that way, because that verse in Deuteronomy 6 where it says, teach them to your children when they lie down and when you get up and when you walk, all those things, that's what happened. And so my life is an example of that being passed down from generations before, because somebody decided to choose God. Somebody decided that those giants that were in front of them are not as big as God. See, here we are. We're in this lower story, and it happens all the time. We're in this lower story where we face the giants as they did. We face the circumstances. We face things that are bigger and tougher than us. We face walls that are impenetrable. And we look at it, we come up face to face with it, and we say, there's no way I'm going to go right, or I'm going to go left. And God says, don't go right or left, just follow me. And so in our lower story, we come face to face with these things, and we don't know what to do. But in the upper story, God is bigger than the giants. In the upper story, God is able to crumble the wall. We all face battles in our own lives. We all come against things that just seem to floor us. But like Joshua and the people that he led into Canaan, we need to be faithful people. We need to look intently at God's word to discover his will for how we should proceed, so that we can find courage and strength. And this is the one thing. As you go, as you start to take courage, as you start to obey, as you see God working in your own life, guess what? The courage grows. And then the next step is easier to take. Because all of a sudden, it's not about you. You're just relying on God. You know, God can take care of this. Maybe you're standing in front of a wall. Maybe you're there and you're standing in front of the wall, and we got to ask this question. The question is not how big are you compared to the wall. If you don't leave with anything else today, I want you to leave with this. The question is not how big are you compared to the wall. The question is how big is God compared to that wall. How big is God compared to that trial? How big is God compared to that trouble? How big is God compared to that circumstance? He's bigger than your regrets. He's bigger than your problems. He's bigger than your own failures. He's bigger than your guilt. He's bigger than your fears. He's bigger and stronger than all of that. See, the real reason for courage is this. The real reason we can find courage is way back at the beginning again, Joshua 1. Verse 9, we're going to read it again. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be frightened, do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you. God gives Joshua this battle plan, and he says, I will be with you. Obey me, and I will be with you. And see, Jesus said in Matthew 28, he said, listen, all authority has been given to me on heaven and earth. I've got all the authority, so this is what I want you to do. This is your battle plan. As you go in your lives, as you go in the world, make disciples. Baptize them in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, and teach them everything I've taught you. Teach them everything that you know. And this is my promise. I will be with you. I don't know if there's ever been five more powerful words than those coming from our God, our Creator. Those 5 words mean that we can live courageous lives. I will be with you.